My son slid a pen across the mahogany table and told me it was time to sign my life away. He smiled when he said it, that soft, patient smile you give to someone who's already lost. "Mom, you've earned this. Let us carry it now." Around him, the room was arranged like a photograph somebody had staged my daughter-in-law Ashley with her hands folded just so our family attorney Bradley Thorne in the good chair, a stack of paper turned to face me with a title printed across the top in a font somebody had chosen specifically to look gentle. Callaway Properties, Succession and Care Plan. Care. That was the word they picked. 38 years I carried that boy. 38 years I fed him and worried over him and sat up with him through fevers. And now he sat across a table from me and used the word care the way you'd use a leash. What Desmond didn't know, what none of the three of them knew, was that the company he was trying to take had stopped being mine to give months ago. I had seen to that myself quietly in rooms they never knew existed. The paper under my hand did not say what he thought it said, and the woman he thought he was so gently burying had spent an entire year learning exactly where every shovel in that house was kept. I let my fingers rest on the pen without picking it up. I looked at my son's face, at the little muscle jumping in his jaw, the same muscle that used to jump when he was 9 years old and lying to me about a broken window. I looked at Ashley, whose folded hands had the smallest tremble in them, the kind you'd only ever notice if you'd spent your whole life watching people's hands to learn what their mouths won't tell you. And I looked at Bradley Thorne, 15 years my attorney, a man who had carried my husband's casket on his own shoulder and who could not this morning bring himself to meet my eyes. 3 people, 1 pen, and a mistake they were all still certain was a plan. "Before I sign anything," I said, and my voice came out level and unhurried, the same voice I'd used to close deals across that very table for 30 years. "There's a name on this document I'd like somebody to explain to me." The room went so still I could hear the old radiator tick against the wall. Now, before I tell you what happened next in that room, I have to take you back. 14 months back to a time when I was still foolish enough to believe that blood meant something. Because you cannot understand how a 64-year-old woman outplayed her own children at their own game without first understanding what those children were willing to do to her. And you cannot understand what they tried to take without first understanding what I built with these 2 hands. So let me start where the story truly starts. Not at that table. It starts with me, a paint bucket, in a rundown 1-bedroom apartment on the west side of Atlanta in the summer of 1987. Wherever you're watching from tonight, sit with me a while. I'll tell you all of it. My husband Samuel and I did not come from money. I want that understood before another word, because people take one look at a woman my age standing next to a $9 million company, and they assume somebody handed it to her. A rich husband, a dead relative, a stroke of luck. Nobody handed us anything. Not 1 brick, not $1. Our very first property was a beaten-down rental unit we bought with money we had saved for 6 years, dollar by dollar, in a coffee can that Samuel kept taped to the underside of the kitchen sink. Every Friday he'd peel back the tape and we'd add whatever we hadn't spent that week, and we'd count it out loud together at the kitchen table like it was communion. Some weeks it was $40, some weeks it was $4, but the can filled the way a thing fills when 2 people refuse to quit on it. When we finally had enough for that first unit, the roof leaked and the pipes were shot, and the previous owner had painted every wall a shade of brown that made you feel like you were living inside a paper bag. We couldn't afford to hire anybody, so we did it ourselves. I painted those walls on my hands and knees. I remember being 8 months along with Desmond, my belly so big I could barely reach the baseboards, and Samuel down on the bathroom floor beside me at 11 o'clock at night with a wrench in one hand and a library book propped open on the toilet lid reading the plumbing instructions out loud so we could fix a leak neither of us understood. It says here, he'd read squinting to turn the whatever it is counterclockwise. Which way is counterclockwise when you're lying on your back, Samuel? And we'd laugh until my sides hurt because we were young and broke and covered in other people's grime, and we were building something and we knew it. That is how Callaway Properties began. Not with an inheritance. With a coffee can, a library book, and 2 people who would not be told no. We bought the second unit 2 years later. Then a third. Then a small building with 4 apartments in it. And I cried the day we signed for that one, because a building felt like a real thing in a way the single units hadn't. Samuel had a genuine gift for numbers. He could look at a place and tell you in his head what it would cost to fix and what it would return in 5 years down close to the dollar. And I had a gift too, though it took me years to find a name for it. I could read people. I could sit across a table from a man trying to sell me a building and know inside of 5 minutes whether he was desperate or dishonest or telling me the God's honest truth. I could tell which tenant was going to pay on time for a decade, and which one had a good heart and a hard month, and just needed a little grace to get right. I read people the way Samuel read a balance sheet, and between his numbers and my eyes, we almost never got taken. We turned that coffee can into 11 buildings, then 20, then more 41 properties in the end, and a management company with our name over the door in gold letters that I paid extra for because I wanted my mother, who cleaned other people's houses her whole life, to be able to drive past and see her daughter's name shining. She got to see it. She passed the year after we hung it. I'm grateful for the timing of that, if you can be grateful for anything about losing your mother. We were happy. I don't want to skip past that too fast because the happy years are the ones that make the rest of it hurt. We had Sunday dinners that ran 4 hours long. Samuel taught Desmond to ride a bike in the parking lot of our very first building, running behind him, with his hand on the seat, and I stood in the doorway of apartment 1B and watched my whole world moving in a circle in front of me. We took exactly one real vacation in 20 years a week on the Georgia coast, and Samuel spent half of it looking at rundown beach rentals and muttering about what he could do with them, and I let him because loving what you built is not a sin. Then 6 years ago, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my husband had a stroke at his own desk in the office with our name on the door, and he was gone before the ambulance could reach Grady Hospital. 59 years old. One minute he was on the phone about a furnace, and the next minute a whole life was over. He left in the middle of a sentence, and I had a company to run and a funeral to plan, and not one single hour anywhere to fall apart in. I remember the men who came sniffing around after. Bankers, mostly. A couple of my own board members. 2 developers who'd wanted our downtown properties for years. Every one of them wore the same expression when they came to offer their condolences, that soft, sorry, calculating look that says poor thing she'll sell within the year, and when she does, we'll be first in line. They looked at a widow in her late 50s, and they saw the last chapter of a book, an ending, something to pick over. What not one of them saw was a woman who had been underestimated her entire life as a black girl in schools that expected nothing as a young wife in banks that wouldn't lend to us as a mother, in rooms where men explained my own business back to me, and who had learned somewhere along the way to make a quiet weapon out of being underestimated. I did not sell. I did not fade. I ran that company for 6 more years alone, and under me it grew larger than it had ever been under the both of us. I don't tell you that to brag. Bragging is a young person's habit, and I've outgrown it. I tell you because it matters to everything that comes after. Every man who counted me out was wrong. And years later, when the people closest to me, the people sharing my own blood sitting at my own table, started making the exact same bet against me, they made the exact same mistake. They just made it from the inside, where a wrong guess costs a great deal more than money. Now let me tell you about my family. You'll need to know them the way I knew them, so you can feel the ground give way the same way I did. Desmond was my only child. As a boy, he was tender in the way that sensitive children are tender. He cried at long-distance commercials. He rescued worms off the sidewalk after rain. And once when he was 6, he gave his entire birthday $5 bill to a man asking for change outside the grocery store, and then couldn't understand why I got tears in my eyes about it. He brought me dandelions from the yard and called them a bouquet, and I put them in a juice glass on the windowsill every single time. At his father's funeral, a 12-year-old Desmond, no. He was grown by then, 32. But grief makes a child of a man held my hand so tight through the whole service that my fingers ached for an hour after and at the graveside. As they lowered his daddy down, he leaned into my ear and whispered, "I'll take care of you, Mama. I promise." I believed him. God forgive me, I believed him for 38 years, right up until the morning I couldn't anymore. Because somewhere in the middle of his life, my tender boy grew into a man who lived just past the edge of what he could afford. A car nicer than his job. A watch nicer than his car. A house in one of those subdivisions with a stone fountain out front and a name on a sign at the entrance meant to make you feel like you'd arrived somewhere. He worked for the company vice president of operations, the business card said. And the truth I never once let myself say out loud, not even alone, was that Desmond was not good at it. He wasn't bad. He was fine. He was adequate. And he spent his whole life feeling that adequate was a shameful, unbearable thing to be, when your mother's name was the name on the building, when every deal you touched got compared to deals she'd closed before you were born. I saw that ache in him. A mother sees. And I never had the heart to name it, so I did what mothers do with the things we can't fix. I looked past it. I made excuses for the overspending. I quietly covered a shortfall here and there and told myself it was helping. I told myself he'd grow into the man his father was given time. That was my blind spot, and I'll tell you something true about blind spots. Every strong woman I have ever known has one, and it is almost always shaped exactly like the person she loves the most. Strength doesn't protect you from that. Sometimes strength is the very thing that lets you carry the weight of not seeing for years. Then there was Ashley. Desmond brought her home 5 years ago and married her inside of 8 months, which should have told me something, but a mother wants her lonely son happy, and I wanted to be glad. 2 years after the wedding, I hired her myself as the company's chief financial officer. And I want to be fair to her even now, even after everything. I have never been able to hate cleanly, and I'm too old to start. She was sharp, genuinely impressively sharp. She was efficient in a way that made the whole office run smoother. She had a real gift with money and numbers, and in 3 years she never once made a mistake I could point my finger at. But there was something in the way she called me Ms. Rose that used to cool the back of my neck, and it took me the better part of those 3 years to understand what it was. She said it warmly, always warmly, too warmly, with the particular practiced warmth of a person who has studied from the outside how warmth is supposed to look and sound, and has learned to reproduce it perfectly the way a good forger reproduces a signature. Ashley wore kindness the way other women wear perfume. If you got close enough, you could catch that it came from a bottle. I told myself I was being an unfair old woman, a jealous mother-in-law, the oldest cliché there is. I told myself to be grateful my son had married someone competent. So I ignored the cool feeling at the back of my neck. That was the second time love made me refuse to see. It would not be the last. And then, thank God, because a story this dark needs one clean light in it, there was Amani, my granddaughter, 10 years old, gap-toothed, serious as a Sunday judge about the things that mattered to her, and completely silly about everything else. She had her grandfather's laugh, which nearly broke my heart the first time I heard it come out of her, and she had opinions about everything, and she was not afraid to tell you that your cornbread was dry. Every Saturday afternoon, that child came to my house, and the two of us made something in the kitchen. Cornbread, peach cobbler in the summer, sometimes a genuine disaster we'd have to throw straight in the trash while we laughed so hard we had to hold on to the counter. She'd sit up on the stool at my kitchen island with a box of crayons worn down to nubs, and she'd draw pictures of Grandma's company, these lopsided little buildings with far too many windows all crammed together, and a stick figure out front in a dress that was meant to be me, and she'd sign each one in the bottom corner with a flourish, like a real artist signing a canvas. I kept every single one of them. I have them still. That will matter later more than you know. One of those Saturdays, both our hands white with flour, she looked up at me out of a clear blue sky, apropos of nothing at all, and asked, "Grandma, you'll always be here, right?" I laughed. It caught me off guard, that question coming from a 10-year-old in the middle of making a mess. But I answered her with the truth exactly as I understood it in that moment. "Baby," I told her, "I'm harder to get rid of than you think." I had no earthly idea, standing there in the flour in the afternoon light, how soon I was going to have to prove those words true. The last person you need to know is Loretta. Loretta Simmons had been my office manager and my bookkeeper for 22 years. She'd come to us when Desmond was still in high school, a serious woman with a young son of her own to raise, and a way of getting quiet, really deeply quiet, right before she said the thing that mattered. She wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and she kept our books the way a surgeon keeps a scalpel. 58 years old now, and in 22 years I had never once caught her in a lie, a shortcut, or a bad mood she took out on anybody else. Loretta was the only person left in the entire world who still called me Rose. Not Miss Calloway, not the boss, not ma'am, just Rose. In a company full of people who worked for me, she was the one soul I'd have told you without a heartbeat of hesitation worked with me. Remember her name, Loretta Simmons. She is the reason I am sitting here in my own clothes, in my own right mind, telling you this story instead of drugged and forgotten and staring at a wall in some facility signed away by my own hand. So that was my whole world 14 months ago. A company I'd built from a coffee can and a library book. A son I loved past every ounce of good sense the Lord gave me. A daughter-in-law I distrusted and made excuses for. A granddaughter who was the brightest thing in my week. A bookkeeper who was more family than most family. And a will, one single will written the week after we buried Samuel and never touched again in 6 years, that left every brick and every dollar to Desmond. All of it. Because I believed the way my mother believed, and her mother before her, that blood was supposed to mean something. That family was the one investment on God's earth that could never ever go bad. I was 64 years old, and I was about to find out just how wrong a smart woman can be about the one thing she never thought not even once to check. It started small. These things always do. One loose thread hanging where you almost don't notice it that you very nearly don't pull. It was a Thursday evening late, and the office had emptied out hours before. Just me and Loretta at our two desks facing each other across the room, the way we'd sat for 22 years. She was closing out the month's books, glasses down on her nose, and that quiet had come over her. I knew the quiet. I'd known it for 2 decades. The quiet meant Loretta had found something she didn't like the shape of. "Rose," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Do we work with an outfit called Meridian Asset Partners?" "Never heard of them," I said. I was tired. I wanted to go home, put my feet up, and watch my programs. "Why?" She was quiet a moment longer than the question needed. "There's $18,000 gone out to them this month, filed as a consulting fee." She took her glasses off then and looked at me across the two desks, and there was something in her face I did not like. "Rose, I've been keeping these books for 22 years. I know every vendor we've got by heart. I know the ones we fired. I don't know this one. I've never seen this name in my life. And here is where I made the choice. I have replayed 1,000 times since the choice that nearly cost me everything, and in the same breath saved my life. Because I was tired and I wanted to go home. I waved my hand and I said the 4 words that sent Loretta Simmons digging into a hole that turned out to have my own grave at the bottom of it. "Let's look at it tomorrow." I thought it was a bookkeeping error, a transposed account number, a vendor I'd approved and forgotten. That's what I told myself as I drove home that night with the radio on. It was the first thread of a rope that 2 people I loved had been quietly braiding for 8 months. A rope meant to hang me with gently, legally, lovingly in front of a judge. And by that same time tomorrow evening, Loretta was going to lay something across my desk that would end my life as I had known it and begin the one you are listening to right now. Loretta didn't wait for me to get my coffee the next morning. She was already standing in my office doorway when I walked in, and she had a folder in both hands, and she had closed the door behind her, which in 22 years she had never once done. "Sit down, Rose," she said. "Loretta, I haven't even set my bag down." "Sit down, please." Something in her voice put me in the chair. She laid the bank statements across my desk one at a time, slow and deliberate, the way a doctor lays out an X-ray when the news is bad and she wants you to see it with your own eyes, so she doesn't have to be the one to say the word. Meridian Asset Partners. $18,000 in October, $22,000 in September, $19,000 the month before that. She kept laying them down page after page until there were 11 statements fanned across my blotter, and at the bottom of the last one, she had written a figure in her small, neat hand and circled it twice hard enough to nearly tear the paper. $214,000. "Over 8 months," she said quietly. "Every dollar out of the main operating account. Every dollar filed as a consulting fee. And Rose, there is no consultant. I pulled every single invoice myself last night, stayed till near midnight doing it. They're 1 page each. No scope of work, no hours, no deliverables, no contract. Just a dollar amount and a wire instruction over and over." She set her glasses down on the desk. "I have made honest mistakes in 22 years of doing this. I know exactly what an honest mistake looks like on a page. This is not one. Somebody built this to look like nothing, and they built it careful." I sat very still. I have learned over a long life that stillness is the single most useful thing a person can do in the moment the floor tilts under them. Panic is loud, and it makes you stupid. It makes you grab the first hand offered, run the first direction, pointed believe the first lie whispered. Stillness lets you think. Stillness lets you count. So I sat in my chair and I let the number settle into me like a stone dropping through deep water, and I made myself think instead of feel. "Who opened the account it's being wired to?" I asked. "I don't know. It's an LLC. In Georgia, the state doesn't make you list the owners on the public filing. They can hide behind the company." Loretta hesitated, and I could see her deciding how much rope to hand me. "But the registered agent is on there. The organizer. The person who actually signed the paperwork to bring the company into existence. That part's public record. Anybody with a computer can look it up." "Then let's look it up, right now." I want to stop and tell you about that moment, because it is the exact hinge the whole story turns on. Everything after went one way instead of another because of what I did in the next 60 seconds, and what I did not do. Every single instinct a mother has was standing up inside my chest and screaming at me to pick up the phone and call my son. "Desmond, baby, there's money going somewhere strange. Come help Mama figure this out." That is what a mother does. That is the reflex 38 years builds into your bones. And if I had picked up that phone and made that call, I would have handed the thief the keys to the house and then asked him kindly to guard the door while I slept. I would be signed away and gone right now. I have thought about that so many times since how close I came out of nothing but love to walking straight into my own destruction. I did not call him. I turned to my computer instead. Loretta came around and stood behind my chair with her hand on my shoulder, and together the two of us we pulled up the Georgia Secretary of State's business registry, and I typed the name into the search box with fingers that were, I'll admit, not quite steady. Meridian Asset Partners, LLC. It came up in half a second. Registered 8 months earlier, right when the money started moving. And there in the field marked organizer, the person who had signed it all into being, was a name. Ashley Brooks. Brooks. My daughter-in-law's maiden name. The name she'd had before she was ever a Calloway. I sat back slowly in my chair. Behind me, I heard Loretta make a small sound like all the air had gone out of her at once. And here is what I understood in that one instant. Not slowly, not piece by piece, but all at once, the way you understand a whole photograph the moment it comes into focus without having to read it, left to right. Every warm family dinner where Ashley had reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Those 3 early morning breakfast meetings she'd scheduled last month, just to help Mom stay on top of everything. The way she'd started so gently, so lovingly correcting me in front of the staff. "Oh, Ms. Rose, I think you mean the Henderson file, remember? We talked about it Tuesday. None of it, not one moment of it had been care. All of it had been construction. She had been building something. Brick by patient brick for months, right in front of my face, and the $214,000 I could see was only the part sticking up above the waterline. I needed to see the rest of it, and to do that I realized with a cold clarity that has not fully left me since I could not trust a single living soul inside the 4 walls of my own company or the 4 walls of my own family. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not as it would turn out my lawyer of 15 years. So I did the second thing that saved my life. I went outside all of them. There is a kind of woman the world simply stops looking at somewhere around the age of 60. If you're my age, you have felt it. You walk into a room, a bank, a doctor's office, a restaurant, and the eyes of everyone under 40 slide right over you like you're a coat rack in the corner. You become furniture. You become invisible. For most of my life, that used to sting me something fierce. I'd fought so hard to be seen as a businesswoman, as an equal, and here the world was deciding I'd aged out of visibility whether I liked it or not. But that week, sitting in my office, staring at my daughter-in-law's maiden name on a screen, I finally understood that invisibility for what it truly was. It was a coat. A coat I could put on and wear anywhere I pleased into any room, and no one would think to wonder what the old woman was up to. They'd already decided I wasn't up to anything, so I put the coat on. I told my office I was taking 2 days off for some doctor's appointments, and I want you to notice, because I certainly noticed later, that this was exactly the story they most wanted to hear, though I didn't yet know why. A forgetful old woman off to the doctor. It fit their picture perfectly. I fed it to them without even knowing I was doing it. And I went to see a lawyer none of them had ever heard of. Not Bradley Thorne, our family attorney of 15 years, the man who'd handled every deal, every contract, every will. Somebody brand new. Somebody clean. Somebody with no thread connecting her to a single person who ate at my table. Her name was Patricia Reed, and she practiced a kind of law I had frankly never had one reason in my life to think about before. Elder law, the specific, grim, necessary business of protecting old people from the very people who are supposed to be protecting them. I laid it all out for her in her small, quiet office, the LLC, the $214,000, Ashley's maiden name sitting right there on the state filing. Patricia listened without interrupting me one time, which is a far rarer skill in a lawyer than you would ever imagine. And when I finally ran out of words, she folded her hands on her desk and looked at me for a long moment. "Miss Calloway, Kantia," she said, "I'm going to ask you some questions. Some of them are going to be unpleasant to hear and unpleasant to answer. And I need you to answer them honestly, not the way a mother wants the answer to be, but the way it actually is. Can you do that for me?" "Ask," I said. "Has anyone in your family recently started suggesting that you're getting forgetful, losing track of things, repeating yourself, making mistakes you didn't used to make?" The cold that went down my spine had nothing to do with the air conditioning in that office. "My daughter-in-law," I said slowly. "She's been correcting me, in front of the staff. Little things. Insisting we discussed something when I have no memory of discussing it. Taking things off my plate so I don't have to keep it all in my head. Patricia nodded slow and grave, like a doctor whose fingers have just found the exact lump they were searching for. Has anyone recently taken out any legal instruments in your name or concerning you? Powers of attorney, anything touching your health decisions or your finances? I don't know, I said. I wouldn't necessarily know, would I? No, she said quietly. You wouldn't, and that Ms. Calloway is precisely the design of it. She leaned forward. I don't want to frighten you before we have proof in hand, but I have done this work for a long time, and the pattern you are describing to me is not two separate problems. A relative quietly moving large sums of money, plus a carefully documented story that you are becoming mentally unreliable. In my experience, that is never two problems. That is one single problem wearing two different coats, and I would very much like to know what they are building before they finish building it. I want to bring in a forensic accountant. Today, this afternoon, if you'll authorize it. Do it, I said. Then, because 15 years of habit is a hard thing to break, even when the ground is falling out from under you, I added. Although I could have our family attorney pull the corporate records. Bradley Thorne. He's handled everything for us for years. He'd have full access. He could... No, Patricia said it fast and flat, and it stopped me cold in my chair. Miss Calloway, I need you to hear me. Until I know exactly who drafted whatever is coming for you, you do not show one page of this to a single person who sits anywhere in the orbit of your family. Not your family attorney, not your accountant, not your pastor, not your oldest friend, nobody. Do you understand me? I thought she was being dramatic. I truly did. Bradley Thorne had sat at my Thanksgiving table for 10 years running. He'd helped carry Samuel's casket. I said, all right, mostly to move the woman along the way. You agree with an overcautious doctor just to end the appointment. Inside of 1 week, I would learn precisely how right Patricia Reed had been, and precisely how much that habit of trust had nearly cost me. The forensic accountant was a quiet, careful man named Nathan Cole, and he worked the way I imagine the very best surgeons work, slowly, methodically, touching nothing until he was sure, saying nothing until he could prove it. It took him 9 days. 9 days I spent going into the office every morning and smiling at my son and my daughter-in-law across the hall, and feeling every single hour like a woman standing on a frozen pond who can hear the ice beginning to crack somewhere underfoot. When Nathan finally sat down across from me and Patricia in her office, he had a thick binder, and he opened it to the first tab, and he began page by page to build the picture I had been unable to see on my own. The $214,000 was real, and it was worse than a straight theft because it had been engineered to look like nothing at all. Each monthly amount was small enough not to trip any alarm at the bank. Each one was dressed up as ordinary, boring business. Whoever had structured it understood exactly how to steal from a company slowly enough that the theft looked like operations. That Nathan told me was not amateur work. That was somebody who knew the inside of a financial statement the way a burglar knows the inside of a lock. But that was not the piece that made me grip the wooden arm of my chair until my knuckles ached. Nathan turned to the second tab. It was a property deed. One of my buildings, a fourplex on Ashby Street, one of the very first buildings Samuel and I ever bought together, the exact building I had painted on my hands and knees while pregnant. The one where Samuel taught Desmond to ride a bike in the parking lot had a quitclaim deed filed against it 4 months earlier. It moved a controlling interest in that building into a holding entity I had never heard of. And my signature was on it. I had never signed it. I had never in my life laid eyes on it before that moment in Patricia Reed's office. This is forged, I said. My voice sounded very far away to my own ears. Yes, ma'am, Nathan said gently. And here's the good news buried in the bad: it's not forged well. Whoever did it was better with numbers than with a pen. That helps us. But Ms. Calloway... He glanced at Patricia, and Patricia gave him a small nod. And in that one nod, I understood the two of them had already sat down together and discussed how they were going to tell me the next part. There's a third thing. While I was tracing the entities and the money, I came across a legal filing being prepared. It hasn't been filed with any court yet. It's still in draft form, but it is far enough along that I was able to see exactly what it is. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk to me. Petition for conservatorship of an incapacitated adult. The whole room went very quiet, and very far away and very cold. I read the words across the top twice to be sure my eyes hadn't betrayed me. Incapacitated adult. And below, in the space in the caption where the name of the incapacitated adult goes mine, Rosemarie Calloway. Explain it to me, I said. In plain words, Patricia, like I'm not a lawyer and I've had a hard morning. And Patricia leaned across her desk and put it into plain words, and I am going to give it to you the very same plain way she gave it to me. Because if there is one gift I can hand you out of this whole story, it is this. I want you to know the face of this thing so that if it ever comes creeping towards you or towards someone you love, you'll recognize it before it's too late. A conservatorship, she told me, is what a court puts in place when it decides that a grown adult can no longer manage their own affairs. Because of dementia, say, or a bad stroke. The court appoints another person a conservator to take control of everything. Your money, your property, where you are permitted to live, which doctors you're permitted to see. When that court order is signed, you stop being a full person in the eyes of the law. You become a ward, and the person holding the pen becomes in every way that actually matters in this world your owner, your keeper. Desmond was going to be my conservator. That was the whole point. Ashley had built the entire case for it dollar by dollar and note by note. That was what every one of those sweet little corrections had truly been. Oh, Ms. Rose, don't you remember? We talked about this, every single one of them, a documented entry in a file being assembled against me. That was what the early morning helping meetings had really been for. She hadn't been helping me stay organized. She'd been manufacturing a paper record of a woman losing her grip on her own life. There's a physician's letter referenced in the draft, Nathan said as gently as a man can say such a thing. A medical evaluation. A doctor stating that you exhibit signs of significant cognitive decline. It's cited as a supporting exhibit. I have never been evaluated by any doctor, I said. For anything like that, in my life. No one has ever so much as asked me a single question. I know, Patricia said. I know you haven't. And that Ms. Calloway is the exact crack that runs straight through the middle of their entire scheme. Right now, they don't know that you know any of this. And a doctor has already agreed to sign that letter, a doctor who has never examined you, signing off entirely on notes your daughter-in-law provided. That single fact is what turns this from an ugly family betrayal into a prosecutable crime. That's the seam. We just have to pull it at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right room. I sat there in that office, 64 years old, a widow who had built a company from a coffee can, and I did the arithmetic of what was being done to me. The title on the document they intended to make me sign, Someday Succession and Care Plan. Care. There was that word yet again, the word that had made my skin crawl at the mahogany table. They were not planning to wait for me to die of natural causes. Dying takes too long, and it cannot be scheduled to suit anyone's debts. They were going to have a judge formally declare that the woman who built Calloway Properties out of nothing had lost her mind, and then so gently, so lovingly for my own comfort and safety, tuck me away somewhere I would never come out of. And while I sat medicated and forgotten, they would run through everything Samuel and I had bled and knelt and saved for until it was gone. And the very cruelest line in the whole terrible sum my son had done this. My Desmond. The boy who gave away his birthday money to a stranger. The man who held my hand so hard it ached and whispered, "I'll take care of you, Mama," over his father's open grave. I made myself ask this question I did not want the answer to. Why? I said. Why would he do this to me? He's my only child. He inherits every last brick of it the day I die. It's all in my will, all of it, and always has been. Why couldn't he just wait? Nathan turned almost apologetically to the final tab in his binder. Bank records. Desmond's personal accounts. A real estate speculation deal 2 years back, a parcel of land he'd bought high at the top of the market, certain he'd flip it fast and then couldn't move at any price when the market turned. Leveraged against nearly everything he owned. He was $400,000 underwater and sinking deeper every month. The Fountain House, the Watch the Car, all of it mortgaged to the hilt against a bet that had already gone bad. He couldn't wait for his inheritance. His creditors were not going to wait. He needed the money now, all of it at once, and somewhere along the way, he had married a woman who knew exactly, precisely, professionally, how to take it. And in that moment, I understood my son completely. And I think that was truly the worst part of the whole thing, worse than the stolen money, worse than the forged deed, worse than the word care. Because he was not a monster out of a movie. It would almost have been easier if he were. He was a weak man in a deep hole he'd dug himself, terrified, drowning, and instead of coming to his mother who had covered his shortfalls his whole life, and would have covered this one too. He had decided that the cleanest, simplest way out of his hole was to bury me in mine. Patricia was watching my face very carefully across the desk. "Ms. Calloway," she said, "I have to ask you what you want to do. Some people, when they reach this exact point, just want to confront it and be done. Blow the whole thing up. Call the police, call the sun, throw it all on the table and let it burn." I thought about that. I let myself really sit with it, turn it over. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because I suspect a great many of you have felt this exact thing at some point and been quietly ashamed of it, and I do not think you should be ashamed of it for 1 second. I did not feel like crying. Not yet. Not there. I felt something else come up through me, something cold and clear and steady, rising like groundwater through soil. I had been reading people across tables for 40 years. I had buried a husband and made payroll the next morning with my eyes still swollen. And these 2 children, my son and the woman he brought home, had made the ancient, stupid, arrogant mistake of believing that grief and age had finally made me small and slow and easy. "No," I said. "I don't want to blow it up. If I confront it now this morning, it's just my word against a forged deed and a bought doctor's letter. They'll deny every bit of it, they'll destroy the evidence over a long weekend, and they'll simply start over next month, cleaner and quieter and more careful, having learned exactly where I was watching. And I will have shown them my entire hand for nothing." I looked Patricia dead in the eye. "I don't want to blow it up, Patricia. I want to close it. Permanently. And I want to do every step of it inside the law so that when it is finally truly done, it stays done, and no clever lawyer and no bad day judge can ever open it back up again." Patricia Reed looked at me for a long, long moment across her desk, and then slowly she smiled, the first real, unguarded smile I had seen from her since I'd walked through her door. "All right, Ms. Calloway," she said. "Then let's sit down and talk about how a woman makes a company completely impossible to steal. Here is what almost no one ever understands about power. It's the thing my son never understood, not once in his whole life, and it's the thing that beat him in the end. The loud move is almost never the strong move. Anybody can scream. Anybody can throw the papers up in the air and slam the door and call a lawyer and start a war at the top of their lungs. That is not strength. That is noise, and noise is what frightened people make right before they lose. Strength is quiet. Strength is patient. Strength is slow, and it is boring to watch, and it does not announce itself. Strength is a 64-year-old woman who smiles warmly across the Sunday dinner table at the son who is trying to destroy her, while 6 days a week in rooms he doesn't know exist, she very calmly and very legally makes it impossible for him to win. Patricia laid the whole strategy out for me over the next 3 weeks, and I am going to walk you through every step of it, because it is the part of my own story I am proudest of, and because God forbid it might one day save the mind and the money and the dignity of somebody listening to my voice right now. The center of the entire plan was one simple, beautiful idea. A conservatorship gives another person control over your property. So the whole answer, Patricia explained, was to arrange things so that when the judge finally went looking, there was no property of mine left for anyone to control. We created what the law calls an irrevocable trust. In plain words, which is the only way I like to talk, I took everything. The company, all 41 buildings, every account. And I moved all of it into a legal structure that I personally, Rosemarie Calloway, no longer owned. It would be run by an independent trustee, a professional with no connection to my family who was bound to follow the terms I had written for the beneficiaries I had chosen. And here is the crucial word, the word that made it a fortress: irrevocable. Once it was done, it could not be undone. Not by me, not by a court, not by a conservator, not by anyone. Do you see the trap in it? The company that Desmond and Ashley were spending all this money and all these months and all this deceit trying to seize control of would on paper simply no longer belong to the woman they were trying to seize. They could win their whole ugly war, get their judge to sign their order, have me declared incompetent from here to Sunday, and find that the prize had turned to smoke in their hands the moment they reached for it. There would be nothing left to conserve. We completed it and had every page of it notarized 4 full months before the morning at the mahogany table. 4 months before the two of them had the first idea there was even a fight. Then Patricia turned to the matter of the doctor's letter, and she dealt with it by making it worthless. She sent me to a neurologist, not a friendly one, not one that anybody I knew had recommended. A respected independent specialist chosen precisely because he had no reason on earth to do anyone any favors. And I sat for a full formal cognitive evaluation hours of it, every test they have memory and reasoning and problem solving and the rest, and the entire thing was recorded on video and formally notarized. The results came back exactly what you would expect from a woman running a $9 million company, sharp as a tack, clear as a bell, competent in every measurable dimension. Now, do you see what that did? Whenever their tame doctor's letter finally surfaced in a courtroom, a letter Nathan had by then confirmed from a physician who had never once been in a room with me, signing his professional name to nothing but Ashley's forged and doctored notes, it would not be one medical opinion against another. It would not be a confusing tie that a busy judge might split down the middle. It would be a real filmed, sworn, independent evaluation on one side and a paid signature on a documented lie on the other. That is not a medical dispute. That is fraud. And it would be sitting right there in the record in my hand, waiting. Nathan, meanwhile, finished tracing every last dollar and every last forged signature, building a chain of evidence so complete and so clearly labeled that a jury could have followed it half asleep. And that is when the week Patricia had warned me about all those weeks before finally arrived. Because I had told her foolishly out of 15 years of habit and trust that I still thought perhaps Bradley Thorne, our family lawyer, ought to look things over. He knew the corporate history better than anyone alive. Surely he could help. Patricia had said no sharp and flat, and I had only half listened the way you half listen to advice that inconveniences you. Then Nathan Cole set a single document down in front of me on Patricia's desk, and I stopped arguing about Bradley Thorne forever. It was the draft conservatorship petition, the one to have me declared insane and stripped of everything. And down in the corner of it, in the metadata of the file, in the specific formatting, in the particular legal language that every lawyer uses like a fingerprint, Nathan had traced its authorship. It had been drafted in the law offices of Bradley Thorne. So had the forged quitclaim deed on my Ashby Street building. Every incriminating document prepared by the man I'd trusted with my family's entire legal life for 15 years. I want to tell you I was shocked. But by then I was finally learning the true shape of the thing, and the shape was this. The people who watch over you the most warmly are sometimes the very ones measuring you for the box. Bradley Thorne had sat at my Thanksgiving table for a decade. He had carried my husband's casket on his own shoulder, wept at the graveside, gripped my hand at the reception, and told me to call him day or night if I ever needed anything at all. And for the last 8 months he had been drawing up the papers to have me declared out of my mind and stripped of everything Samuel and I ever built. He had never once, I understood now, looked worried about me out of love. He'd been taking notes the whole time, just like Ashley, just like my son. That was the final piece. I had the irrevocable trust. I had the sworn, filmed evaluation. I had the complete forensic report, the forged deed, the entire money trail, and now the crooked lawyer who tied all 3 of them together with a bow. I had everything I could possibly need to walk into a courtroom and end it that very week. But I did not end it that week. And I need you to understand why, because it is the heart of the whole thing. I wanted more than to simply survive them. Surviving is what a victim does. I wanted them to walk all the way into the trap on their own 2 feet of their own free will in front of witnesses, so that when it was finished, there could never, not ever, be the smallest shred of doubt in anyone's mind about who had done what, to whom. So I did the single hardest thing I have ever done in the whole of my life. Harder than burying Samuel. Harder than reading the number Loretta circled twice. I decided to play the part they had written for me. I have to tell you exactly how the performance worked, because it matters, and because Patricia made me understand every line of it before she would ever let me try. I never once played the confused old woman where it could be turned around and used against me. Never to a doctor. Never on a piece of paper. I never signed a single thing while confused. Patricia was absolutely ironclad about this, and she said it to me more than once, looking me dead in the eye. The only stage I was permitted to perform on was my own living room in front of Desmond and Ashley, and no one else who could ever matter in a court of law. Everywhere it counted, every legal room, every medical room, every notarized page, there existed a sharp recorded sworn version of Rose Calloway saying the exact opposite. The forgetful old woman was a ghost I let only my own children see. The real one was on video, notarized, wide awake and waiting. And Lord forgive me, but did I give those 2 a show? I forgot a meeting we had supposedly scheduled, and I let Ashley walk me through her calendar so patiently, so lovingly, while I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, honey. My mind these days, I don't know where it goes." I asked the very same question twice in a single board meeting, and I watched Desmond and Ashley trade a look across the conference table. A quick, private, hungry look there and gone. In half a second, the look of two people watching their plan come true right in front of them. And every time I caught that look, it should have broken my heart, and some nights it did. But in the daylight, it only sharpened me. I let them correct me. I let them help me into my coat like I couldn't find the armholes. I let Ashley announce to the staff, warm as fresh bread, "Don't you worry, I've got Mom's whole calendar now. She doesn't have to keep all of that in her head anymore." Every single performance did two things at once. And this is the part I want you to really hear, because it's the part my boy never saw coming. First, it kept them comfortable. Comfortable people don't look closely. As long as they believed I was fading right on schedule, they'd never think to check whether the very company they were fighting over had already quietly 4 months ago slipped out of my ownership entirely and into a trust they couldn't touch. And second, the part I'm proudest of, it lured them forward. Because the more certain they became, the closer they came to actually filing that petition in a real court of law. And the very moment they filed a legal action built on a forged deed and a bought doctor's signature, they would stop being merely cruel children who might be quietly talked out of it or hushed up over a holiday. They would become criminals who had handed me in writing, stamped and dated by the county itself, the exact evidence needed to end them. I was setting the table, and I was warmly, lovingly, patiently inviting them to sit down and eat. Loretta was the only soul inside that entire company who knew the truth. And when I finally sat her down and told her everything, the two of us at my kitchen table with the blinds drawn low like a pair of women planning a jailbreak, she got very, very quiet. That deep quiet I knew so well. And then she reached down into her worn old handbag and set a spiral notebook on the table between us. "I started this 14 months ago, Rose," she said. I opened it, and I felt my breath leave my body. Page after page after page in Loretta's small, careful, unmistakable hand. Dates, times, observations. A. Requested access to the reserve accounts again today. No operational reason I can find. A. Asked me for the master vendor list, said it was for an audit that nobody authorized and nobody's heard of. A. In Mr. Desmond's office again, with the door shut, both of them went quiet the second I knocked. 14 months of it. A second secret set of books, the only set that ever really mattered. "Loretta," I whispered. I could barely get it out. "You knew. For 14 months you knew, and you never—" "I didn't know what," she said, and she reached across and put her hand flat on the notebook over her own handwriting. "That's the truth, and I'll swear to it. I didn't know a plan. But Rose, a chief financial officer, does not need her hands on the reserve accounts and the master vendor list and every drawer in the building, and that woman was reaching for every single lock we've got one after another. Real quiet, real patient. 14 months ago, something in my gut went cold, and it never once warmed back up. And I have lived long enough to trust my gut over my ears." She looked at me steady. "I didn't know it would come to this. God is my witness, I prayed it wouldn't. But I figured that one day you were going to need somebody to have been paying attention all along. So I paid attention. And I wrote it down. 22 years. I would have told you Loretta Simmons was the finest bookkeeper in the city of Atlanta. Standing in my kitchen with that notebook open in my hands, I understood I'd been selling her short the whole time. She had been keeping the one set of books that would end up mattering more than all the others combined. So, I had my trust. I had my sworn evaluation. I had my forensic report, my forged deed, my money trail, my crooked lawyer, and now 14 months of contemporaneous eyewitness notes from a woman a jury would believe in a heartbeat. Every piece was in place on the board. I should have felt nothing in that moment, but ready. But there was one last thing I had to do before I could give the signal, and it was the thing that finally broke me clean in half. Loretta had gotten a recording. During one of the family planning meetings, one of the sweet little gatherings where they'd smile at me and slide papers across the table and take things off my plate, she had left her phone sitting on the credenza in the corner screen down recording. And after everyone thought the room had emptied out, it had captured the two of them talking. Alone. Honest for once. She had been carrying it around for a week, and she hadn't wanted to give it to me, had put me off twice. And finally I had to look her in the eye and tell her that I needed to hear it with my own ears or I'd never be strong enough to finish what I'd started. I waited until the office was completely empty that evening. Everyone gone home, the cleaning crew finished the parking lot dark. I sat alone at my desk with the last gray light of the day dying out in the windows, and I pressed play with my thumb. And I heard my son's voice, the voice of the little boy who brought me dandelions in a juice glass, the voice that gave away his birthday money to a stranger on the sidewalk. The voice that whispered, "I'll take care of you, Mama," into my ear over his father's open grave. Once the judge signs off, Desmond said, easy and calm, the way you'd discuss a vacation, "We put her in Fairhaven. It's a nice enough place. Clean. She'll be comfortable there. And honestly, by that point, she won't really even understand what she signed anymore, so it's kinder this way. Kinder than dragging it out for years. It's really the humane thing when you think about it." And then Ashley's voice, light and bored and picking at something, a fingernail maybe. And no more Saturday visits with the kid, thank God. I am so tired of pretending that child's crayon scribbles are the Mona Lisa. "Oh, Imani, it's beautiful. It goes right on the fridge. Every single week. And underneath the both of them, I swear before God Almighty, I have sworn it in a courtroom since I could hear my granddaughter faint in the next room over, humming to herself, that tuneless, happy, private little hum a child makes when she's deep in her own world and doesn't know a soul is listening. Imani, 10 years old, bent over her crayons at somebody's kitchen table, drawing a picture of Grandma's company with too many windows, while one thin door away her own mother and her own father calmly discussed which facility to bury her grandmother alive in and whether they'd have to keep smiling at the old woman until the judge finally made it official. I put my head down on my desk in the dark in my own empty building, the building with my name on the door in the gold letters I bought so my mother could see them. And I cried the way I had not cried since the day they lowered Samuel down into the Georgia clay. I cried for my son, for the boy I had loved wrong or loved too much or simply loved past the point where any amount of love could still reach him. I cried for the child with the dandelions who was gone, and who I understood now, all at once sitting there in the dark, had been gone a great deal longer than I'd ever let myself know. I cried for the 38 years. I cried for the whole life I'd thought I was living that turned out to have a rot running through the center of it that I'd been too full of love to smell. And I let myself have it. All of it. For about 10 minutes alone in that dark office, I was nothing in the world but an old woman whose only child wanted her gone. And then I sat up. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand hard both cheeks. I reached over and I switched on the desk lamp, and the warm little circle of light pushed the dark back to the corners of the room. Because grief is a room you are allowed to visit. It is not a house you are required to live in. My mother taught me that on her knees scrubbing other people's floors, and I had somehow forgotten it, and my son had just reminded me. "They think grief is going to make me small," I said out loud to the empty office, to Samuel, to my mother, to whoever above was listening that night. "They have forgotten who buried a husband and still made payroll the very next morning." I picked up the telephone on my desk. I dialed Patricia Reed. And when she answered on the second ring, I said 4 words, and my voice did not shake at all. "It's time. Let them file." They filed the petition 11 days later. I know the exact day because Nathan Cole called me the very moment it hit the county's system. Petition for conservatorship of an incapacitated adult in the matter of Rosemarie Calloway. Filed by Desmond Calloway. Represented by the law offices of Bradley Thorne. Supported by the sworn medical opinion of a physician who had never once in his life been in a room with the woman he was declaring insane. Now most people getting that phone call would feel their stomach drop straight through the floor. Mine did the exact opposite. I felt it settle. I felt something in my chest go quiet and firm like a foundation curing. Because a plan that lives only inside someone's head can still be denied. Explained away. Waved off as a misunderstanding, a mistake, a family thing that got out of hand. But the very moment those two put it in writing and handed it to a court of law, it stopped being their word against mine. It became a paper trail with their names printed all over it. Desmond's, Thorne's, the bought doctors built on the foundation of a forged deed and a purchased signature. It became a crime. Filed in triplicate. Stamped and dated by the government of the state of Georgia itself. They had stopped braiding the rope. They had tied the knot and slipped it around their own necks and stepped off the stool. All I had to do now was hold perfectly still and let them lean. But I still had to get to the table. And this final stretch of the plan was in truth the most dangerous part of all of it, because now for the first time the clock belonged to them. Once a conservatorship petition is filed, the court begins to move on its own schedule. There would be a hearing date set. And if they somehow got in front of a judge before I was fully ready with their tame doctor and their grieving son performance, and Ashley's careful stack of forged notes, there was always a chance. Small, but real. That they'd catch some overworked judge on a bad afternoon who saw exactly what the whole scheme had been built from the ground up, to make him see a confused old black woman and a loving, well-dressed family, simply trying to do the hard, sad, responsible thing. I could not let it reach a courtroom on their terms and their timing. I needed to pull it back into my room. The mahogany table, the family meeting. The pen turned to face me, the one place on earth where I controlled every single thing in it, and where the two of them would still be absolutely certain that they controlled it all. So I baited the very last hook. Through Loretta and through my own patient daily performance, I let it become known, never stated outright, just allowed to drift through the office air like a scent that I was tired. That the fight, whatever small fight I'd seemed to have left, had gone out of me. That maybe it was simply time to sign a few papers and let the children handle things now. A quiet retirement. A power of attorney. No need for anything as ugly and public and expensive as a courtroom, not when we were family, not when we loved each other. I let Ashley come to believe all on her own that I wanted to hand it all over willingly with a smile across a nice table. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist it. A signature freely given at a family table is so much cleaner than a contested court fight. No hearing, no judge, no risk. It was the exact outcome she'd been building toward from the very first stolen dollar. I simply let her think that reaching for it was her own clever idea. But before any of that could happen, before I ever got to the table, there was the week I very nearly lost the entire thing. And I have to tell you about it in full because it was Loretta again, always Loretta, who reached out one hand and caught it as it fell. Ashley got suspicious. Not of the plan. She never suspected the plan. Not the trust, not the neurologist, not Nathan, not one piece of it. She got suspicious of Loretta. And that in its own way was far more dangerous than if she'd started suspecting me directly, because Loretta was the single thread that if it were ever pulled unraveled the whole tapestry in an afternoon. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Ashley had taken to coming into the office early. I understood later she'd been quietly going through people's desks in the empty morning hours, mine included, and on this particular morning she walked past Loretta's desk, and her eye caught on an envelope sitting in Loretta's out tray. An envelope with a return address printed in the corner. Reed and Associates Attorneys at Law, Patricia's firm. I was in my office watching through the glass wall, a coffee cup halfway to my mouth, and I saw Ashley stop walking. I saw her go back a step. I saw her pick the envelope up off the desk and turn it over in her manicured fingers. And I saw her face change, and my heart went to solid ice in my chest, because if that woman opened that envelope or asked even one more question than Loretta could answer, then 14 months of patience and planning and swallowed grief died right there on top of a bookkeeper's desk. Loretta, Ashley said, holding the envelope up between two fingers, her voice bright and pleasant and absolutely terrible. What is this? Since when does this company use outside counsel? We have Bradley for everything. A little pause, and then the knife slid out from under the pleasantness. And since when does Mom have her own personal lawyer? And Loretta Simmons, God bless her, God keep her 22 years of loyalty and the coldest steady nerve I have ever witnessed in a living human being, did not so much as blink. She looked up over her reading glasses. She let her whole face soften and fall into something sad and gentle, and just a touch embarrassed, the face of a woman caught keeping a confidence she didn't want to break. And she lowered her voice the exact right amount, the way you do when you're about to share a hard private truth you'd rather not say out loud. Oh, she said. That. She glanced just quick toward my office, then back to Ashley, and she leaned in a half-inch, drawing her into the secret. Ashley, honey, I really shouldn't say, but just between the two of us. She let out a small, sorrowful breath. She's getting her final arrangements in order. The prepaid funeral, the burial plot right next to Mr. Samuel's, she was very particular about that. Power of attorney, the will, all of it. She had me quietly find somebody discreet to handle the whole package for her, somebody outside the company, so it wouldn't get around the office. Loretta shook her head slowly, mournfully, the very picture of a loyal old employee grieving in advance. She didn't want you all seeing the paperwork and getting upset before you had to. You know how she's been lately, bless her heart. Half the time I don't think she even remembers she asked me to set it up. I have to remind her. And I watched it land. Through the glass coffee cup frozen at my lips, I watched every word of it land on my daughter-in-law's face. I watched Ashley's expression travel from suspicion to surprise, and then to something I will be ashamed on that woman's behalf about, until the day I actually do go into the ground next to Samuel. Relief. Ashley was relieved. Because it fit. Every piece of it fit the story she herself had spent 8 months constructing. A forgetful old woman quietly and morbidly arranging her own funeral, too addled to even keep track of the fact that she'd arranged it, That was not a threat. That was not a lawyer building a defense. That was their whole case walking around on two legs and doing their work for them. Loretta hadn't just deflected the question. She had reached out and handed Ashley one more perfect piece of evidence for the exact narrative they needed, and Ashley took it and smiled, and her shoulders came down from around her ears, and she said, "Oh, that's so sweet, actually. Poor thing. Well, you let me know if she needs any help with any of it." And she set the envelope gently back down on the desk, and she walked away. The lie that saved my life was a lie they desperately wanted to believe. That is the one thing I understood about people building a false story about you, and it is the thing I will leave with you tonight. If you remember nothing else, they will swallow anything on earth that feeds the story and choke on anything at all that doesn't. I had spent 14 months carefully feeding them my weakness, spoonful by spoonful, until they'd grown so fat and so comfortable on the taste of it that they had completely lost the ability to recognize the moment I quietly switched the spoon and started feeding them poison. That night, Loretta and I sat at my kitchen table again, blinds drawn, and only then, with it safely behind us, did she finally let her hands begin to shake. I reached across the table and I held them in both of mine until they went still the way she'd steadied me 100 times over 22 years. "That was too close, Rose," she said. "I saw my whole life flash. I nearly—" "No," I told her, and I held her hands tighter. "That was perfect. Don't you see? Now they're not just comfortable anymore. Now they're in a hurry." I looked at her. A woman arranging her own funeral is a woman who's ready to sign. You didn't just save it, Loretta. You lit the fuse. I was right. 4 days later, Ashley suggested a family meeting. Just to go over some paperwork, she said. Nothing formal, nothing to worry about, just family at the house around the table. I told her that sounded lovely. I told her I'd have Loretta bring the good coffee. And so at last, we come back around to the mahogany table. Back to where I started this whole story, all those thousands of words ago. Back to the pen. Understand now exactly what I saw when I walked into that room, because now finally you can see it with the same eyes I did. Desmond in his good suit, freshly shaved, wearing that soft, patient, terrible smile. Ashley, hands folded just so on the table in front of her, that small tremble in them she couldn't quite still, because she was so close now, so very close to the finish line she'd been running toward for 8 months. And Bradley Thorne, 15 years my family's attorney, a pallbearer at my husband's funeral, sitting in the good chair with a neat stack of paper turned to face my seat at the head of the table. Succession and care plan. They believed, every one of them, that they were watching the final move of a game they had already won. Checkmate in one, and the old queen didn't even see it coming. They had no idea they were sitting inside a room I had built, at a table I had set, playing out a trap they themselves had filed with the county courthouse 11 days before in triplicate with their own names on it. I sat down at the head of the table. I let my fingers come to rest on the pen, and I let the silence stretch out long and longer still, because I have learned across a lifetime that people who believe they've already won cannot bear a silence. It unnerves them. They rush to fill it. They show you their hand just to make the quiet stop. "Mom," Desmond said gently, right on cue, leaning toward me. "You don't have to read every page of it. Bradley's been all the way through it twice. It's really just a formality at this point. It just lets us take a little of the weight off you, that's all. You've carried it long enough." "I'm sure it does, baby," I said, and I picked up the pen. Ashley leaned forward 1/2 inch. I saw it. I felt it. I will treasure that 1/2 inch for the rest of my natural life. And then I set the pen back down on the table. "Before I sign anything," I said in that same level, unhurried voice, "there's a name on this document I'd like somebody to explain to me." And I reached out and I turned the whole stack of paper over, not to their carefully prepared last page, the signature page they'd all been staring at, but to a page I had placed inside that stack myself, early that same morning before any of them arrived. Nathan Cole's forensic report, the cover sheet, and printed across it in plain black letters, Meridian Asset Partners, LLC, organizer Ashley Brooks. Total funds diverted from Callaway Properties operating accounts over 8 months, $214,000. Nobody at that table moved. Nobody breathed. "That's the first name," I said pleasantly, and I turned to the next page. "Here's another one. A copy of the quitclaim deed blown up large. That is my signature on a deed I never signed, transferring a controlling interest in my building on Ashby Street. A building I painted on my hands and knees while I was carrying you, Desmond, before either of you two was so much as a thought in this world. Mr. Cole here tells me it's a good forgery. He also tells me it is not a great one. I turned to the next page, and here I said is my very favorite name of them all. The draft petition. The authorship traced and highlighted running straight back to a single set of law offices. I lifted my eyes, and for the first time since I'd sat down, I looked directly at Bradley Thorne. Yours, Bradley. You drafted it. You carried my husband's casket on your shoulder. I watched you do it. I watched you cry. And then you sat down in your office and you drafted the papers to have his widow declared out of her mind and stripped of everything the two of us ever built. Thorne had gone the exact color of the paper on the table. Rose, he started, you have to understand the situation is more complicated than— Don't. I did not raise my voice. I have never in my life had to raise my voice to be heard in a room, and I was not going to begin with the likes of him. Don't you spend one of your last honest breaths on a lie, Bradley. You're going to need them. And then I turned back to my son and to the woman he'd brought into my family. And here at the very end, I gave them the two things they had never once seen coming, the two moves I'd made months ago, alone in rooms they didn't know existed while they were busy congratulating each other. Now, the two of you have spent all of this effort, I said, folding my own hands on the table, mirroring Ashley's, all these months, all this lying, all this stealing, trying to get control of my company. So I do think you deserve to know something. I let it sit a beat. It isn't mine anymore. It hasn't been for 4 months. Every brick of it, every building, every account, every dollar, I moved all of it into an irrevocable trust before the leaves even turned. I don't own it. I can't own it. And that means a court cannot hand it to a conservator because there is nothing left of mine to conserve. I watched the calculation start behind Ashley's eyes and then collapse in on itself. You filed a petition 11 days ago to take control of a house I had already moved out of. You've been chasing an empty box across a courthouse for 11 days. Desmond's mouth opened and closed and opened again. Mama, you don't— I'm not finished. And now I gave them the last one. The one I had been holding tight in my chest since the very first performance. The very first oh my mind these days, honey. You want to know the part of all this I'm proudest of, Desmond. It's the forgetting. The repeating myself in meetings, letting your wife walk me to my coat like I couldn't find my own front door. I leaned forward and I looked my only child dead in the eye. I have known since the very first month. Since before Meridian ever wired its first dollar out, I knew. Every single time you watched me lose my grip across a table and traded that quick little hungry look with your wife, I was looking right back at you. I wasn't slipping, son. I was performing. I let you believe it every day because I needed you to feel safe enough and greedy enough and sure enough to actually file. I needed you to march all the way into a real courthouse carrying your forged deed and your bought doctor and your crooked lawyer and put your name on it so that what you did to me stopped being a sad family matter that could be hushed up over a holiday weekend and became a crime that a district attorney could prosecute. I held his eyes and I did not let go. You were never the hunter here, Desmond, not for one single day. From the very first month, you were the thing I set the trap for. And right on that word, the door to the room opened. Loretta walked in. She was carrying a banker's box, 14 months of note statements, invoices and evidence, and she set it down on the far end of the mahogany table with a single, soft, final, tremendous thud. And behind Loretta, standing framed in the doorway, was a woman none of the three of them recognized, a financial crimes investigator arranged by Patricia to be present at exactly this hour, her notebook already open, her pen already moving. And that was the precise moment the alliance died. Because Ashley, quick, cold, brilliant. Ashley did the math faster than anyone else in the room, faster than her own husband, and she did not turn to me. She turned to Desmond, and her lovely warm mask fell off completely, and what was underneath it was fast and flat and vicious. This was his idea, she said to the investigator, to the room, to anyone. All of it. It was his debt. $400,000, his mess, his stupid land deal. I only handled the paperwork he begged me to handle. I told him it was a bad— and I begged you. Desmond turned to his wife, and I watched his whole face come apart. You built you found the doctor, you set up the— And the look on my son's face as he turned and truly saw her, I will remember it with a grief I honestly did not expect to feel even after everything. Because I watched my boy understand in real time in front of witnesses that the partnership he had betrayed his own mother for was made of the exact same material he had used to betray me. It had no floor. It never had. The two of them had built their entire future together on a single simple principle that the people closest to you are worth sacrificing the instant it becomes convenient, and they had finally at long last run all the way out of other people to sacrifice until the only ones left standing at the table were each other. Bradley Thorne very quietly reached for his coat on the back of his chair. "Sit down, Bradley," I said without even looking at him. "The nice young woman in the doorway has some questions for all three of you, and I promise you are going to want to be able to tell people later that you stayed and answered them." I stood up from the head of my table, an old woman, 64 years old, standing in her own dining room in her own house in her own right and clear and wide-awake mind. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. And I meant it from the bottom of my soul, and I believe it's precisely because I meant it that it landed the way it did. I have buried a husband, and now I have lost a son, and I promise you, I have no appetite left in me for anybody's pain. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it so that the very last thing you take from me isn't my own name on a lie. I looked down at the pen still lying there on the mahogany where I'd set it, and I reached out and I slid it slowly back across the table toward my son, the very same gesture he had made to me an hour before returned to him now complete. "Now, get your hands off the pen, Desmond." I met his eyes one final time. "It was never yours." It moved quickly after that, the way things always do once they finally truly break. Desmond and Ashley were charged. Elder financial abuse, forgery, conspiracy. Bradley Thorne surrendered his license to practice law before the state bar could take the trouble of stripping it from him. And last I heard he was facing charges of his own that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the fact that a man who will forge one deed has usually forged others. The forged quitclaim on my Ashby Street building was voided and the building came home where it belonged. The $214,000 was traced frozen and recovered nearly whole. And the doctor, the physician who signed his professional name to the mental state of a woman he had never once laid eyes on, lost the right to practice medicine in the state of Georgia. I did not go to the hearings, not one of them. I had seen enough of those two faces across enough tables to last me the rest of my natural life, and I had far better things to do with the years I have left than spend a single one of them sitting on a hard bench, staring at what my son had allowed himself to become. Now I want to tell you the two things I did do instead, because the true ending of a story like this one is never the courtroom. It's never the handcuffs. The real ending is what you find the strength to build in the empty, aching place that the betrayal carves out of you and leaves behind. The first thing I did was for Amani. She was not her mother, and she was not her father. She was a 10-year-old child who drew me crayon buildings with too many windows, and once asked me with flour on both her small hands whether I would always be here. And I made up my mind, sitting in Patricia's office signing papers, that I was not going to let the sins of Desmond and Ashley Calloway cost that little girl the one grandmother she had left in this world. I set up a separate trust for her, walled off and armored and untouchable, guaranteeing her education, her security, her future. Every single thing she could ever need, no matter which facility the state of Georgia decided to send her mother and father to, and no matter for how long. And then I went to war quietly and completely, and without mercy, for the legal right to keep seeing her, to keep her Saturdays, to keep her in my kitchen. And I won that fight too. Of course I did. By then I'd gotten good at fighting the kind of fight that stays won. The first Saturday she came back to my kitchen after all of it, after the arrests, the lawyers, the ugly whispered version of events I knew she'd overheard some of, she climbed up onto her same stool at the same kitchen island, as if not one single day had passed. And then she got very quiet. That serious, grown-up quiet children get when a real question is coming. "Grandma," she said, "a long, long time ago, I asked you if you were always going to be here." "I remember it, baby," I said. "I remember it just like it was yesterday." "Are you?" she asked. "Still?" I reached over and I dusted a little flour onto both of her hands, and a little onto both of mine, the way we'd always started. "You asked me that," I told her, "and I went and made sure of it. For you." And that in the very end was the truest thing in the whole story. Everything I had done in the dark, every performance, every swallowed tear, every patient, lonely move across 14 long months, some part of all of it had been, so that this one child would still have somewhere in her life one single person who would never ever lie to her. The second thing I did was for all the ones who are just like me, but who don't have a Loretta, because I got lucky. I want to be honest with you about that. I had a woman who paid attention for 14 months on nothing in the world but instinct and love, and a cold feeling in her gut she'd learned to trust. Most people my age who get quietly robbed and quietly declared incompetent by the very family that's supposed to love them do not have anyone at all watching. Nobody keeping the second set of books. They simply disappear into nice, clean, comfortable places, signed away with their own trembling hands, and they are never fully heard from again. And the world drives past the building and calls it care. So I took a portion of what Samuel and I built out of that coffee can, and I started a foundation. It provides free legal help. Real help, the kind I could afford, and most cannot, to elderly people being defrauded and disappeared by the people who are supposed to protect them. I named it after Loretta Simmons. She cried when I told her, and then she scolded me for making a fuss and embarrassing her, and then she agreed to run the whole thing because of course she did. She was never really my bookkeeper. She was my partner. It only took me 22 years and one attempted crime to put it on paper. My great-nephew Elijah, 27 years old, honest all the way down to the bone, is learning the company now from the ground floor up the right way. The coffee can way. The way that starts with a wrench and a library book and refusing to be told no. Loretta runs the foundation. The people around my table now on Sundays and every other day are people I chose on purpose with my eyes wide open, and every single one of them earned their chair. I'm 64 years old. I lost the son I raised. I'll carry that until the day I die, and I've made my peace with the fact that the peace never fully comes. But I found out something in the losing of him that I want to leave you with tonight. Wherever it is you're watching me from, whatever table you're sitting at, whoever it is in your own life you've been making excuses for, blood is not the same thing as family. Blood is an accident. It's chemistry. It's a thing that happens to you without your say-so. Family is a decision, one you make and remake and make again every single ordinary day, in the people who choose to stand between you and the dark when it costs them something to do it. My son shared my blood, and he sold me for $400,000 and a way out of a hole he dug himself. A bookkeeper who owed me nothing but a day's work for a day's pay kept the one set of books that saved my life and asked for nothing in return but the chance to keep paying attention. They spent an entire year trying to prove that I had lost my mind. Not once in all that time did it ever occur to a single one of them that I was using it.